November 1944. The Hurtgen Forest, a jagged maze of pine and frozen mud straddling the German-Belgian border, where fog clung like a living thing and death arrived before you heard the shot. In the pre-dawn darkness of November 15th, Private James Caldwell crouched behind a splintered oak stump, his Lee Enfield number for press against his shoulder, breath ghosting in frigid air. Around him, B Company, 2nd Battalion, lay pinned on Hill 493 slope by German snipers who had transformed the ridge into a killing ground. Every advance ended with screaming or silence. Caldwell's fingers traced his rifle bolt, feeling modifications made over 3 weeks of night watches and stolen moments in supply tents. The alteration was subtle, invisible to inspection, but violated every British Army regulation. He had shortened the bolt throw, adjusted the timing mechanism, and recalibrated the return spring tension for faster cycling. In careless hands, the modification could cause catastrophic failure, jamming at the worst moment or triggering dangerous misfires. But Caldwell was not careless, and tonight, that forbidden innovation would mean the difference between survival and slaughter. James Caldwell had grown up in the Scottish Highlands, in a village too small for most maps. His father, a gamekeeper, taught him that precision shooting was necessity, not sport. Clean kills meant families fed through winter. By age 9, Caldwell could read wind and calculate distance by instinct. At 14, he dropped running deer at 200 yards with iron sights. When war came, he enlisted believing his skills would be valued. Instead, he received a standard Lee Enfield and assignment to a rifle company where doctrine trumped innovation and questioning orders earned punishment. The Lee Enfield No. 4 was magnificent, reliable, accurate, with 10-round capacity outmatching most rifles. But its bolt action required full rotation and pull that limited rapid follow-up shots. And in combat, speed mattered as much as accuracy. Caldwell first noticed this during range training, where instructors emphasized controlled fire at 15 rounds per minute. But he had watched men die in first engagements because that deliberate pace gave enemies time to take cover, return fire, call support. He had seen British squads suppressed by smaller German units because the enemy delivered more rounds in critical opening seconds. The solution was obvious: increase bolt cycling speed without sacrificing accuracy. During long night watches, Caldwell studied his rifle with focused attention. He disassembled the bolt mechanism hundreds of times, learning every spring tension, every friction point, every millisecond delay. The modification he designed was elegant but dangerous. By shortening the bolt handle and adjusting its angle, he reduced throw distance. He filed internal contact points to minimize friction, adjusted extractor tension for reliable cartridge extraction despite faster cycling. Most critically, he modified the firing pin spring, reducing tension just enough for faster bolt closure while maintaining sufficient primer strike force. The work took 3 weeks of careful, secret effort in darkness with borrowed or improvised tools, always hidden from officers who would court-martial him for tampering with military equipment. When he tested the modification during late October patrol action, results were extraordinary. His accurate fire rate nearly doubled, but he told no one knowing innovation without permission was insubordination. That being right meant nothing if also disobedient. November brought B Company into the Hurtgen Forest, a nightmare landscape where trees exploded into deadly splinters and men died from exposure as often as enemy action. The battalion's objective was Hill 493, a ridge German forces had fortified with interlocking fire fields. Intelligence indicated light resistance. Intelligence was wrong. The attack began at dawn on November 14th, with 2 companies advancing in textbook formation. They made less than 100 yards before first casualties, shots cracking from fog with lethal precision. German snipers in elevated hides turned the approach into an abattoir. Men dropped with headshots before identifying targets, before returning fire, before diving for cover. The attack stalled immediately, companies pinned or forced back. By nightfall, B Company had lost 19 killed and 32 wounded, gaining 0 ground. Major Thornton ordered the company to hold and wait for clearer weather, but everyone knew waiting meant giving Germans time to reinforce. That night, Caldwell lay in his foxhole listening to wounded men moaning in no man's land, men who couldn't be retrieved because any movement drew immediate sniper fire. He thought about his modification, about the faster bolt cycle that might suppress enemy snipers long enough for others to move, to flank, to survive. He also thought about the court-martial he would face if discovered. Fear and anger warred in his chest. Anger won. The second attack came at dawn on November 15th, doomed from the start. Major Thornton ordered different approach. B Company advancing along left flank, while C Company provided covering fire. Theory was sound, but theory meant nothing against snipers who had spent the night refining positions. First shots came at 0540. Private Morrison, walking point, was hit in the throat and died choking. Sergeant Davies took a round through the shoulder. Lieutenant Hadley was killed instantly by a shot below his helmet rim. Within 90 seconds, the advance collapsed into chaos, men scrambling for cover, while invisible snipers continued methodical work. Caldwell went aground behind the oak stump, pressing into earth as bullets snapped overhead. Around him, platoon remnants scattered across 30 yards of broken ground, all pinned and helpless. Corporal Bennett, 15 feet left, tried crawling backward and was immediately hit in the leg, bullets shattering his femur, leaving him screaming. No one could reach him. No one could move. German snipers had established complete dominance, and without suppression or smoke or artillery, there was no way to break it. Men were going to die here. Caldwell realized, not in heroic charge, but pinned and picked off one by one. Unless someone did something doctrine did not allow. Caldwell raised his head slowly, scanning the fog-shrouded ridge. The German snipers were invisible, positions concealed by mist and camouflage, but he could read the battlefield like his father read Highland moors. Shot spacing, impact angles, brief muzzle flashes, all told a story. At least 4 snipers, probably 5, positioned in staggered line across the ridge at 10 to 20 feet elevation. They were firing from trees or elevated heights, using fog as cover while maintaining clear sight lines. Standard counter-sniper doctrine called for artillery or mortar suppression, followed by flanking maneuver. But there was no artillery, no time for maneuvering, and every second of inaction meant another man dying. Caldwell made his decision between heartbeats. He shifted position, bringing his Lee Enfield up, but pressed firmly into shoulder, cheek against stock in familiar embrace. Through iron sights, he could see nothing but gray fog and darker shadows, but he didn't need clear visibility. He needed instinct from years of hunting in Highland mist, an ability to read movement in shadow and subtle. Betrayals of concealed position. The German snipers were good, professional soldiers who understood fieldcraft, but they had made one critical error. They had established a pattern, a rhythm allowing Caldwell to predict where next shots would come from. Left flank fired every 40 to 50 seconds. Central position was faster, firing every 30 seconds. Right flank was conservative, taking longer but never missing. If Caldwell could identify exact positions when they fired, when muzzle flash gave them away, he could engage them before they relocated. The left flank sniper fired first, rifle crack, followed by wet thumb behind Caldwell. In that instant, he saw it. Tiny bloom of yellow-white light 40 yards ahead, perhaps 15 feet up, gone almost before registering. He swung his rifle toward the position, mind automatically calculating elevation and windage. He couldn't see a clear target, but he knew where the sniper was. Caldwell fired, the Lee Enfield bucking, and in the same fluid motion, worked his modified bolt. His hand moved in a blur, shortened throw allowing him to cycle the action in a fraction of normal time. He fired again at the same position, then a third time, each shot placed within a 2-foot circle. No way to know if he scored a hit, no time to verify before the next target presented itself. The central sniper fired 7 seconds later, position revealing itself 20 yards ahead, slightly right. Caldwell swung onto him immediately, modified bolt cycling with unnatural speed, 3 rounds downrange in less than 4 seconds. Around him, men began noticing someone was returning effective fire. Corporal Bennett had stopped screaming, staring at Caldwell with wide, pain-shocked eyes. German snipers noticed too, because suddenly the pattern changed. Methodical fire became irregular, uncertain, as snipers realized they were being engaged. The right flank sniper broke, discipline first, firing twice rapidly at Caldwell's position, both rounds smacking into the oak stump. But that aggressive response gave him clear fix on the position. He shifted aim, breathing steady despite flooding adrenaline, and fired 4 rounds in 6 seconds. One round found its mark. Caldwell saw the shape in the tree convulse and collapse, body tumbling from elevated high to land in undergrowth with a sound like breaking branches. First confirmed kill, and it changed everything. Men began to move, not advancing yet, but shifting to better positions, preparing to support unexpected suppression. Sergeant Willis, pinned behind a fallen log, called out orders to concentrate fire on the ridge. Rifles began cracking up and down the British line, not aimed fire, but suppressive volleys forcing German snipers to keep heads down. It wasn't coordinated, but it created exactly the chaos Caldwell needed. Remaining German snipers were caught between maintaining positions or relocating to avoid counterfire. Either choice carried risk, and in that moment of enemy uncertainty, Caldwell pressed his advantage. The central sniper tried to relocate, a fatal mistake, revealing movement through fog. Caldwell caught the shift in shadows, brief silhouette of a man moving between trees, and he fired on instinct. The German went down hard, and whether that was killing shot or disabling wound didn't matter, because the sniper was out of action. For confirmed or probable hits in less than 90 seconds, a rate of fire that should have been impossible for bolt-action rifle, and the German sniper line was collapsing. The left flank position fired one more time, hurried shot going wide, then fell silent. The killing ground was no longer dominated by invisible enemy marksmen. Sergeant Willis seized a moment, voice carrying across the slope with authority. He ordered the platoon to advance by sections, using temporary suppression to gain ground. Men moved immediately, driven by sudden hope they might survive. Caldwell continued firing, not at confirmed targets now, but at suspected positions, suppressive fire keeping enemy heads down. His modified bolt cycled again and again, each shot carefully aimed even in advancing chaos. He was burning through ammunition at a rate that would horrify any supply officer, but ammunition could be resupplied, and dead soldiers could not. The platoon gained 20 yards, then 30, men diving into better cover, establishing new firing line closer to the ridge. Corporal Bennett was being dragged backward towards safety. German snipers were falling back or eliminated. Either way, their grip on the battlefield was broken. Caldwell knew the respite was temporary. Germans would counterattack or bring reinforcements, and when they did, the platoon needed defensible position. He continued firing, targeting any movement ahead, maintaining pressure until the last man reached relative safety. Only when immediate crisis passed, when Sergeant Willis called temporary halt, did consequences of Caldwell's actions begin to unfold. Captain Morrison, who had been coordinating the advance from command position, came forward with rifle slung in face, set an expression mixing relief and anger. He crouched beside Caldwell's position, eyes immediately going to the Lee Enfield, to the pile of spent brass casings, to the rifle itself still radiating heat. Morrison was a career officer who appreciated initiative, but also valued discipline above individual innovation. He reached out and lifted Caldwell's rifle, examining it with expert eye, and within seconds he had identified the modifications. The captain's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Recognition first, as he understood what had been done. Shock followed, as he calculated the risk and regulation violation. Then something else. Conflict between knowing those modifications had just saved British lives and understanding they represented court-martial offense. Around them, soldiers were digging in, establishing firing positions, tending wounded. Every one of them owed their survival, at least in part, to the illegal innovation Captain Morrison now held. Morrison set the rifle down carefully and looked at Caldwell with expression that seemed to age him by years. He understood the impossible position they both faced, caught between regulations existing for good reasons and results that couldn't be argued with. Standard bolt configuration wasn't arbitrary. It had been designed by engineers who understood tolerances required for reliable function. Modifications carried risk of catastrophic failure. In peacetime, Caldwell would have faced immediate charges. But this was not peacetime, and desperation rewrote the rules. Morrison spoke quietly, voice pitched so only Caldwell could hear. He asked how long the modifications had been in place, how many rounds fired, whether there had been malfunctions. Caldwell answered honestly, providing technical details of what he had done and why, explaining careful testing he had conducted. The captain listened without interrupting, eyes moving between Caldwell's face and the rifle. When Caldwell finished, Morrison was silent for a long moment. Finally, Morrison spoke again, words carefully chosen. He said he had not personally examined Caldwell's rifle in detail, that his attention had been focused on coordinating advance and managing casualties, that any specific technical modifications were matters he would need to investigate before making official report. The meaning was clear. Morrison was giving Caldwell time, a window of plausible deniability. But the captain also made clear that if the rifle malfunctioned, if it failed in combat, consequences would be severe. It was a gamble both men knew, calculated risk putting regulations against immediate survival needs. The reprieve was temporary and conditional, but more than Caldwell expected. He nodded acknowledgement, and Morrison moved on to coordinate with other section leaders. Around him, the platoon was transforming captured ground into defensive position, men digging foxholes and establishing fire fields. Fog was beginning to lift slightly, morning sun burning through mist to reveal the ridge ahead in greater detail. German positions that had seemed so impregnable now looked different, less mysterious, more vulnerable. For the next 6 hours, B Company held their gained position, beating off 2 German counterattacks that came with mechanical precision. The first counterattack came at 08:15, platoon strength force moving down from the ridge in flanking maneuver. Caldwell engaged at range, his modified bolt allowing him to pour accurate fire into German formation at a rate disrupting their cohesion. Other riflemen took cue from his fire discipline, and the counterattack stalled. Germans withdrew after losing a dozen men. The second counterattack came at 1100 hours, better coordinated and supported by mortar fire turning the slope into a storm of steel fragments. But by then B Company had dug in properly and called up their own mortar support. The battle became grinding exchange of fire, neither side gaining decisive advantage. Caldwell fired more than 200 rounds that day, his modified rifle cycling smoothly through magazine after magazine, never jamming, never failing, proving his innovation's reliability under harshest conditions. Other soldiers noticed, particularly those in his immediate section, who could see the unnatural speed with which he worked his bolt. Word spread quietly through the company, whispered conversations in foxholes, men asking whether rumors were true, whether Caldwell had really modified his rifle. By mid-afternoon, Sergeant Willis had heard enough talk to approach Caldwell directly, asking to examine the rifle. Willis was a different sort of leader than Captain Morrison, a man who had risen through ranks by competence and survival. He had enlisted in 1939, fought through France and North Africa, learned his craft in brutal school where theory meant nothing. He took Caldwell's rifle and examined it with careful attention of a man understanding weapons were tools, that doctrine was guidelines, and that the difference between living and dying often came down to small innovations regulations never anticipated. He worked the bolt himself, feeling the shortened throw, reduced friction, faster cycle time. He asked technical questions showing genuine understanding, and Caldwell answered each honestly. When Willis returned the rifle, he said something Caldwell would remember for the rest of his life. He said regulations existed to protect soldiers from their own mistakes, but that sometimes regulations themselves became obstacles to survival, that the line between dangerous modification and life-saving innovation was written in blood and hindsight. He said if Caldwell's modification continued performing reliably, if it continued giving British soldiers an edge where fractions of seconds determined who lived and died, then questions of regulation would sort themselves out after the war, when everyone was safe and comfortable. But until then, Willis would not report the modification to higher command. It wasn't quite approval, not official endorsement, but it was acceptance, practical acknowledgement that warfare made its own rules and survivors were those who adapted. By nightfall on November 15th, B Company still held their advanced position on Hill 493 slope, and casualty reports showed 11 dead and 23 wounded over the day's fighting. Those numbers were grim, but officers who understood statistics knew they represented something close to miracle. Previous days' assault had resulted in 19 dead and 32 wounded, without gaining any ground. By that measure, the second attack had been remarkably successful, and everyone in the company knew that success had begun with one private's illegal rifle modification and suppressive fire that broke the German sniper line. No one said it officially, but in informal networks that mattered most to soldiers, his reputation was established. Over the following week, as the company consolidated their position, something interesting happened. Other soldiers began approaching Caldwell quietly, asking questions about his rifle modification, requesting he examine their Lee Enfields. Some were simply curious. Others were more direct, asking whether Caldwell could perform similar modifications on their rifles. Caldwell was cautious in responses, acutely aware that spreading the modification could bring official attention he didn't want. But he was also a soldier understanding that keeping knowledge to himself when it could save British lives was its own form of selfishness. He began teaching small groups of soldiers, never more than 3 or 4 at a time, explaining theory behind the modification and practical steps required to implement it safely. He emphasized risks, need for careful adjustment and testing, importance of understanding the rifle's mechanical tolerances. Some soldiers attempted the modification themselves with varying results. A few achieved the same performance improvements Caldwell had, while others discovered their alterations caused reliability problems. But enough succeeded that within 2 weeks, the company had perhaps a dozen riflemen with modified bolts, soldiers who could deliver rapid, accurate fire at rates exceeding standard doctrine. Officers noticed a change in company performance, the increased effectiveness in firefights, the ability to suppress enemy positions more quickly. Captain Morrison certainly noticed, and he faced a decision that would define his career. He could report widespread modifications to battalion command, initiate formal investigation, and restore proper discipline at the cost of removing an advantage saving British lives. Or he could maintain his careful blindness, allowing modifications to continue while monitoring for failure signs. Morrison chose the latter, a decision reflecting both pragmatism and moral courage. The breakthrough came in early December, when the company participated in major assault on German positions defending approaches to the Roer River. The attack was part of a larger offensive designed to push Wehrmacht forces out of Hurtgen Forest. Intelligence indicated heavy German fortifications, multiple defensive lines, and veteran troops who had held the position for weeks. The assault plan called for dawn attack following 30-minute artillery barrage, with infantry companies advancing in coordinated waves. It was sound doctrine, and everyone knew it was going to be bloody. The company was assigned to assault a fortified farm complex anchoring the German left flank, a position controlling the main approach road. The complex consisted of stone farmhouse, 2 large barns, and several outbuildings, all surrounded by earthworks and wire obstacles. German defenders had transformed it into fortress, with machine gun positions covering every approach. Previous reconnaissance patrols had been driven back with casualties. Taking would require coordination, firepower, and aggressive infantry assault. Combination that sounded straightforward in briefing rooms but fell apart under enemy fire. The artillery barrage began at 0530 on December 8th. British guns laying down systematic bombardment that turned the farm complex into inferno. Caldwell watched from assembly area, his modified rifle slung across his back, equipment checked and rechecked. Around him, soldiers made small preparations veterans knew mattered, checking ammunition, adjusting gear, making peace with whatever waited ahead. Some prayed. Others smoked final cigarettes. A few wrote letters they hoped would never need to be sent. Caldwell thought about his father, about Highland hunts where patience and precision determined success. The barrage lifted at 0600 precisely, and whistles blew along British line, officers shouting commands. The company advanced in 2 platoons abreast, moving through devastated forest toward the farm complex visible as darker shadows through smoke. Germans responded immediately, machine guns opening fire from concealed positions that had survived artillery barrage. Men began falling, and the advance that looked so organized became familiar chaos of combat. Caldwell's section went to ground 50 yards in the farm complex, pinned by a machine gun position in stone farmhouse that commanded entire approach. The gun was firing in disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition while maintaining suppression, and every attempt to advance drew immediate fire. Lieutenant Shaw called for smoke grenades, but smoke drifted slowly and provided only brief concealment. The assault was stalling exactly as previous attempts had stalled. Officers were shouting for covering fire, for concentrated volleys to suppress the machine gun position, but standard rifle fire was ineffective against position hardened with sandbags and stone walls. Caldwell understood what was needed even before Sergeant Willis shouted the order. The machine gun position had to be suppressed long enough for other soldiers to close with grenades or flanking fire, which meant sustained, accurate rifle fire aimed at guns slit visible in farmhouse wall. Standard bolt-action rifles could deliver that fire, but not with sufficient volume to keep professional machine gunners from returning to their weapon between volleys. His modified rifle could, if he could maintain fire discipline under pressure, if the modification held up, if he could judge elevation despite smoke and chaos. He settled into firing position behind shell crater, bracing his Lee Enfield against broken earth. He fired his first round at the gun slit, carefully aimed shot striking the sandbag barrier. He worked his modified bolt immediately, smooth action chambering fresh round in a fraction of a second, and fired again at the same point. Then again, and again. Caldwell established rhythm, firing every 2 seconds, each shot aimed at narrow opening where German machine gun protruded. The modification that had seemed dangerous experiment weeks ago now became the difference between suppression and futility. His rate of accurate fire was nearly double what standard Lee Enfield could achieve, and the volume of fire he directed at the machine gun position forced German crew to abandon their weapon. Other riflemen saw what Caldwell was doing and joined their fire to his, creating sustained barrage, keeping the machine gun suppressed. Sergeant Willis immediately ordered assault team forward, and 6 soldiers sprinted toward farmhouse carrying grenades and wire cutters. They reached the farmhouse wall, and grenades crashed through windows and doors, explosions sending smoke and debris billowing. The machine gun fell silent permanently, its crew killed or disabled, and German defensive line buckled at its critical point. B Company poured through the breach, soldiers advancing into farm complex in violent close-quarters battle that swept through buildings with grenade and bayonet. Caldwell continued firing, targeting German soldiers attempting to reinforce the position, his modified bolt cycling with mechanical precision as he shifted from target to target. The battle lasted another 20 minutes before German resistance collapsed and survivors withdrew. The farm complex was secured at cost of 14 British casualties, a price significantly lower than planners had estimated. After-action reports would credit the success to coordination and aggressive leadership, but soldiers knew the assault had succeeded because one private with modified rifle had suppressed a critical strong point long enough for infantry to close and destroy it. Major Thornton, battalion commander, arrived at the captured position 2 hours after fighting ended, touring the complex to assess damage. He found Caldwell sitting on farmhouse steps, cleaning his rifle with methodical care, surrounded by spent brass casings. The major stood watching for a moment, then asked to examine the rifle himself. Caldwell handed it over without hesitation, knowing the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. Thornton worked the bolt several times, feeling shorten throw and reduce resistance, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. He had been a soldier long enough to recognize innovation when he saw it. The major asked the same questions Captain Morrison and Sergeant Willis had asked, seeking to understand the modification and assess its reliability. Caldwell provided the same honest answers, explaining what he had done and why, acknowledging risks and regulation violations, but also presenting evidence of more than 1,000 rounds fired without malfunction. Thornton listened carefully, and when Caldwell finished, the major made a decision that would ripple through British infantry doctrine in ways neither man could predict. He said upon their return to battalion headquarters, Caldwell would be temporarily detached from combat duty and assigned to work with battalion armor to document his modification thoroughly, to develop standardized procedures, and to train other soldiers in proper execution. It wasn't quite official approval, but it was recognition that the innovation had value worth preserving and spreading. Over the following 6 weeks, Caldwell worked with Master Sergeant Hicks, the battalion chief armorer, to refine and standardize the bolt modification. Hicks was a skeptical professional who had maintained British rifles for 20 years and didn't appreciate amateurs tampering with precision mechanisms. But he was also a craftsman who could recognize quality work. and after testing Caldwell's rifle extensively, he concluded the modification was both safe and effective when properly executed. Together, they developed standardized procedure that could be taught to armors and implemented without requiring the individual skill Caldwell had brought to his original innovation. They identified critical tolerances that had to be maintained, tools required, testing protocols needed. By January 1945, the procedure had been taught to armors in 3 battalions, and modified rifles were appearing throughout the division. German intelligence noticed a change in British rifle effectiveness, but struggled to explain it. Captured Lee Enfields appeared standard upon cursory inspection, and without detailed examination of bolt mechanisms. The modification was nearly invisible. German tactical reports began noting increased British fire rates and attributed it to improved training, never suspecting individual soldiers had altered their weapons. The modification spread through informal networks, passed from battalion to battalion by soldiers who had seen its effectiveness. By war's end, an estimated 1,500 British rifles carried the Caldwell modification, though it was rarely called that, and official records never acknowledged its existence. Private James Caldwell survived the war and returned to Scotland in summer 1945, his service record noting nothing unusual beyond consistent competent performance. He received no medals for his innovation, no official recognition for the modification that had saved British lives. The military establishment, uncomfortable with implications of accepting that a private had improved upon engineered doctrine through unauthorized modification, quietly absorbed innovation while avoiding any official acknowledgement of its origins. Caldwell returned to the Highlands and worked as gamekeeper like his father before him, and he rarely spoke about the war or about the weeks when his rifle had made the difference between survival and slaughter. But among veterans of Hurtgen Forest fighting, his name became legend, passed down in stories and reunions, remembered by men who had watched him suppress German positions with impossible speed, who had learned his technique and used it to survive their own desperate battles. The British Army never officially adopted the modification as doctrine, never credited Caldwell in any manual or after-action report. But the innovation persisted in memories of soldiers who understood that warfare rewarded adaptation, and that regulations, however necessary, sometimes needed to be bent by those who faced death and chose to fight back with every tool available. Caldwell's illegal bolt modification remains a footnote in military history, overshadowed by larger battles and strategic decisions. But to the men of B Company who fought on Hill 493 slopes in November 1944, it was the innovation that brought them home.